Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the National Beef Association, I would like to welcome you to the start of the seminars. This being the first of a fairly busy day in here for everyone. I'm chairing this meeting. My name's Chris Dodds, for people that don't know me. I am the Executive Secretary for the Livestock Auctioneers Association, so we represent all the livestock markets in England and Wales. And we're proud to be here today and for you all to see this exceptionally good modern facility at Darlington Market. Just to clarify and make sure that everyone is very well aware, I see that our logo has been sort of mixed in with Breeder. I'll give you an assurance that we're not part of Breeder and they're not part of the LAA. Livestock Auctioneers are an institution on their own, and we're proud of that. So we're going to start the meeting. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of my three guests sat on the table here today, and they will then do a presentation to you. And following that, we'll open up for, hopefully, an interesting and full discussion with questions from the floor to the three speakers. So immediately on my right, I have John Powell. John is head of agriculture sectors team in DEFRA, a post he's held since 2020. He's been in the business a long time, and he joined MAF in 1983 until 1999. And then from 1999 to 2017, he worked as an advisor to over 20 EU candidate countries on the establishment of EU agricultural policies and institutions. I chaired a meeting yesterday where we had some Ukrainians attend the meeting virtually, which was very depressing, unfortunately, as you would expect. But John tells me that he very nearly ended up in Ukraine acting and supporting and building an infrastructure for their ministry. John rejoined DEFRA in 2017, and he's worked on future farming policy, EU exit, and the environmental land management schemes. When John stands to talk, or sits to talk, he'll give an overview of the changes in agricultural policy in England. He will cover the phasing out of the basic payment scheme, and will highlight the main new schemes that farmers, landowners, and stakeholders can get involved with. So John is our first speaker. I'll introduce the other two now as well. On my far right, I have Daniel Zeichner. Daniel is the Shadow Minister for Food, Farming, Fisheries and Rural Affairs. He's a Member of Parliament for Cambridge, where he has been since 2015. Daniel says that he's a lifelong environmentalist. He's a member of Greenpeace and has brought leaders on divestment to speak in Cambridge. Outside politics, Daniel enjoys football, live music and walking. He was, in his youth, a promising middle-distance runner. Daniel will be talking about the changes to farm support and what we are hearing from farmers. Labour's guiding principles will be to make, buy and sell more in Britain, which is really good to hear. He will explore how that link to farm support, environmental improvement and food security, and how that differs from the government's approach, which is to leave it to the market. Daniel will also touch upon supply chain fairness, role of local markets and abattoirs, and strengthening the groceries supply code of practice. On my left-hand side is Will Jackson. Will is the Divisional Engagement Director at AHDB. Will grew up on a dairy farm in Derbyshire. Prior to joining AHDB, he was Senior Agricultural Manager at the Co-op, where he had responsibility for the beef, lamb and poultry accounts, along with experience of working on a day-to-day basis with farmers and retailers in the agricultural team at Arla Foods. Will is going to share with us AHDB's response to changes in government policy and how they are supporting producers now and in the future. So I think you'll agree we've got a very interesting panel of speakers. So without further ado, I would like to ask John Powell to lead off the discussions and present to you. John.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone, and thank you too to the National Beef Association for the invitation to speak to you this morning. The future of farming policy is vitally important for farms as they move into a post-EU Common Agricultural Policy world. I hope this short presentation will be helpful in demonstrating how our future farming policy can provide opportunities for alternative income streams and some food for thought on how your businesses might interact with DEFRA policies. I hope I've got the technology right here. There we are. These are the things I'd like to briefly cover. I'm not going to read everything on the screen because of the time available to us. So, we need to see the agricultural transition package as a whole, but environmentally sustainable farming is fundamental to our new policy. We are introducing 3 environmental land management schemes as part of the agricultural transition, which was published back in November 2020. These sit alongside our support for food production. Our new schemes will support farmers and land managers to improve the environment, to improve animal health and welfare, to reduce carbon emissions and store more carbon, to support the resilience of our agriculture and ecosystems to climate change risks, and to make farm businesses more sustainable. This is an evolution, not a revolution, with changes introduced over a 7-year transition period from 2021 to 2027, giving farmers and land managers time to adapt and prepare. Our guiding principles for managing the transition are to co-design things with the people who would need to use them, to help people to do the right things for their businesses, the climate and the environment, to earn people's trust in our systems and approach, to make things as clear and simple as possible, to make things fair and reasonable, to make things work for those who have to use them, and to focus on achieving outcomes. This slide just gives an overview of the timetable of the introduction of the various schemes that we will be introducing in the environmental land management area. There are a number of components that make up our development and implementation of the environmental schemes. We've been conducting tests and trials on these schemes since 2018, and these will continue through the transition period. This year we will start to roll out core elements of the Sustainable Farming Incentive, expanding those elements until we have the full offer available in 2025. The Local Nature Recovery Scheme is a more ambitious successor to the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. It will pay for the right things in the right places and support local collaboration to make space for nature in the farmed landscape, particularly contributing to our target for trees, peatland restoration, habitat creation, and restoration and natural flood management. We plan to start a phased rollout of this scheme from 2023. And finally, our Landscape Recovery Scheme will pay landowners or managers who want to take a more radical and large-scale approach to producing environmental and climate outcomes through land use changes and habitat and ecosystem restoration. We will be launching at least 10 projects between this year and 2024, with all 3 schemes being live from 2025. On direct payments, one of the biggest changes is the phasing out of direct payments. This means reductions will be made to the basic payment scheme from 2021, and then to delinked payments from when these replace BPS in 24. Money saved by the direct payment reductions will be directly reinvested into English farming and agriculture through our new schemes. The government has committed to provide the same cash total to the sector in each year of this Parliament. Recipients won't have to farm the land to receive these payments. Delinking will simplify the payments further as we phase direct payments out. It will free up farmers to focus on running their businesses with access to our productivity grant schemes or the animal health and welfare pathway, and or delivering the public goods that can be rewarded under the new environmental schemes. We'll also be introducing a lump sum exit scheme, which will enable farmers who wish to retire or leave the industry to do so in a managed way. The scheme should free up land for new entrants and expanding farmers, helping to boost overall farm productivity It will sit alongside extra support to help new entrants into the industry. The applicants must have first claimed BPS in 2018 or earlier. The application period has opened from 12 April to 30 September this year, with payments starting from November this year. Just briefly, back to the environmental land management schemes. The Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme is about helping make agriculture more environmentally sustainable alongside the production of food. The scheme has been rolled out incrementally. Our key aims are to encourage actions that improve soil health, improve water quality, increase biodiversity, support climate change mitigation, and improve animal health and welfare. We plan to open for applications in the summer on a rolling basis. The scheme will expand and more than likely change over future years with the full set of standards in place by 2025. When the scheme launches this summer, the environmental standards will be open to farmers who are currently eligible for payments under the BPS. The initial phase of the SFI has been designed to run alongside countryside stewardship. As with other schemes, land can be in both the Sustainable Farming Incentive and countryside stewardship, as long as the actions are not contradictory and we don't end up paying twice for the same actions. You can see some of the suitable options that are listed on the slide, and the full list is available in the department's guidance. The aim is flexibility. It's about what works best for the farmer and their particular circumstance. The Local Nature Recovery Scheme has been positioned as the improved and more ambitious successor to the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, saying it will take the best of countryside stewardship and add in new elements to make a scheme that has wider appeal and can deliver more and better outcomes in a less bureaucratic and more supportive way. It will pay for actions to make space for nature in the farm landscape and the wider countryside, alongside food production. And we will start to roll out this scheme in 2023. We've already commenced testing, and an early version of the scheme will be available, as I say, to a limited number of people in 23. More information will be available on how farmers can get involved in testing the scheme rules and options and payment rates, with the rollout expected to commence by 24. Also, I'd like to focus on the animal health and welfare pathway. The pathway in 2022 will start to fund a yearly farm visit from a vet or a vet-led team. The Animal Health and Welfare Review, as it will be known, is the first step on the animal health and welfare pathway. It's designed to help reduce endemic diseases and conditions within livestock, promote responsible use of veterinary medicines, improve welfare and increase farm productivity, and build on the strong relationships that exist already between farmers and vets. Now, you can apply if you're a cattle, pig and sheep keeper who has more than 10 cattle, 20 sheep or 50 pigs. For cattle, the Animal Health and Welfare Review will help livestock farmers cover the costs of vet testing for endemic diseases and conditions and their time. The payment rates per species are currently set at £522 for a beef cattle review and £372 for a dairy cattle review. The review is not about writing a health plan, but is more about an open conversation with the vet about health, welfare and biosecurity. Also, it is about some achievable actions that a farmer can take, and there might be additional support for doing so. There will also be diagnostic testing for a priority endemic disease or conditions. We also have a number of productivity-related schemes that will be designed to support food production to make farms more efficient, more effective and more sustainable. We're reinvesting the money that's been saved through direct payment reductions into these schemes, and we're offering a range of interventions that will help farmers improve their productivity in producing food in a sustainable way, support them as we move through the transition, creating a thriving agriculture sector, and rewarding farmers for actions that benefit the environment. Some of the schemes that are available are listed on the slide, and you can visit DEFRA's Future Farming blog for more details on each scheme. What I would like to do briefly is just touch upon the Farming Investment Fund, which has a number of components. The Farming Investment Fund, which is funding for equipment, technology and infrastructure that improves farm productivity and benefits the environment. the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, which provides targeted support to businesses so that they can invest in equipment, technology and infrastructure, and the Farming Transformation Fund, which contains themes to tackle water management, improving farm productivity and adding value, which actually launched this week. Finally, the changes we make over the transition period will not just be about funding. By the end of the transition period, we will have reformed our regulatory approach for agriculture. Our future regulatory approach, we want to have a clear distinction and coherent relationship between the basic requirements farmers and land managers are obliged to meet by law and the scheme standards where they are paid to go beyond this minimum. As we make improvements to the regulatory baseline, we will simplify regulation to remove duplication and overly bureaucratic processes. We will be proportionate so that the regulation is fair and can flex to the diverse range of farms and environments across England. We will support and enable farmers with clear, user-friendly guidance. We will prioritise addressing areas of the highest risk so that our environment and the health and welfare of animals receive the protection they need. And finally, we will use evidence to explain why compliance is necessary. And our new regulatory approach will be implemented from 2024. And lastly, as I mentioned at the start, we don't want to go back to the system where we impose policies and schemes on farmers. Our new approach is very much about co-design, working with you to design the schemes, to make sure they are user-friendly, to make sure they do achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve as farmers and as businesses, based on your needs. So there are a range of ways that you can get involved. Take part in stakeholder workshops, send views through your farming organisations who we work with, apply to be part of our scheme pilots, and to share your views during consultations. We also have opportunities for you to be involved in a number of ways. You can go onto our DEFRA blog, onto DEFRA's website and find out how to get involved. And lastly, thank you for your interest, and I'm happy to take questions later in the panel discussion. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, John. A lot there for you, and I'm sure that some of you have been digesting it over the months coming up to here, but there'll be lots of questions, I'm sure, for John. We'll move on, and we'll do all, as I said, we'll do all three speakers, and then we'll open up to a general discussion. So I'd now like to hand over to Daniel, the Shadow Minister, and Daniel, thank you.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I'm Daniel Zeichner. I've been the Shadow Agriculture Minister for the last 2.5 years. And I started by going in detail through the Agriculture Act, which underlies a lot of these changes in Parliament a couple of years ago. And what's really good is now to have the opportunity to come out, predominantly to listen to what people are saying about what's happening. Last year I went out and met a number of people on some of the Elm Test and Trial site. I went to the Yorkshire Dales, to Northumbria, to try and understand quite how it's going to work. I'm not an expert, like my colleagues on the table here, I'm a politician. So I'm going to talk in some fairly general terms. I'm also going to be quite critical, and I'm not critical of John as a civil servant, I'm critical of the government who set the things the civil servants have to do. And I'll try and outline how I think we should do things differently. The key point from Labour is about making, buying and selling more in Britain. It sounds like a very simple phrase, but if you start to think through what it means, it is actually a very different approach, I think, from the current governments. And partly, I think it's important because the world has changed, as we all know. So I'm going to say a little bit about farm support, and because that's the main subject today, absolutely about the importance of improving our environment, but I also want to talk about food security, because again, that at the moment is particularly important. And if you ask the question how food secure this country is, actually the government's account at the moment I think is fairly complacent. They actually had to do an analysis under the Agriculture Act, which they produced just before Christmas. It's a thick document, it's well researched, but frankly as you go through it, I would say it's complacent. And part of the reason there's a problem, in my view, is that George Eustace's view of how you secure food security is through international trade, being open to the world, which I've got no objection to, but when the world's becoming a more dangerous, difficult place, I think long supply chains make you vulnerable. And my criticism of George Eustace, by and large, is there is no plan for the future. And the reason there is no plan is because that is the plan. The plan is leave it to the market. And that, I think, can be difficult. And I think, just to give you a couple of examples of the different approaches, when we had the fertilizer crisis, still ongoing, and we see our factories in this country, and you look at the different approach taken in other parts of the world, in Europe, governments intervened. They intervened to try and deal with the problem. Here, short-term fixes, real reluctance to intervene. Similarly, obviously we're talking beef today, but if you look at what happened with the pig sector over the last year, it, in my view, is pretty awful. And when you look at what happened with the labour crisis, which is ongoing, again, real reluctance to intervene, took too long, and left businesses like yours facing real problems. And in terms of the supply chain, frankly, although there were some good potential measures in the Agricultural Act, still the balance of power with the retailers, I would say, is out of kilter, and the government is being slow to address that. So let me come to agricultural support, and John outlined it very, very clearly, very well. One thing I would say, looking at your faces, is that, like me, you probably find it quite complicated. I do think it's a very complicated set of measures. And one of the great arguments about coming out of the CAP was it was all going to be simpler. Well, far from looking simpler, it looks to me to be highly bureaucratic, very difficult, and actually for a lot of people, it's probably not going to work, is the truth. And I think there was a political sleight of hand at the beginning, because public money for public goods, well, who can argue with that? That sounds good. Guarantee the amount of money overall in the Parliament? That sounds good. And I think a lot of people thought, well, I used to get this amount of money through basic payments. Now I'll have to do something different, and I'll get that money back. And that was kind of left hanging in the air. But that's not the way it's going to work. For a lot of people, they're not going to get the money back. And if they do go down some of these routes, they're going to have to put a lot of money in, money they haven't got. So when you look at the cuts that have already started last year and are going to be coming through this year, I know they've brought it forward 6 months. In some ways, you're getting your cuts early. If you're losing 25% of your support, 35%, for a lot of people who are running marginal enterprises, that's really, really serious. And the idea that there's more stuff possibly in the future, that's not going to help pay the bills today. So we've been trying to find out just how much of that money, which has been taken out, is actually going to be getting back to farmers this year. And that's quite a hard thing to find out. Some of it's going through stewardship. That doesn't necessarily, of course, equate to food. But we don't think there's going to be that money back in. And we think farmers are going to struggle. Okay, at the moment, good prices, although very high input costs. But that's why we think we want to see how this is actually working out, which is why my Shadow Secretary of State, Jim McMahon, has joined others in a call to slow this down, to see how it's actually working. Because we do not want to find that people's businesses are going under because the money is not getting through. So we've got a lot of criticisms of it. But there is a fair point. What would we do? Well, in the current turmoil, it's very hard to know quite when elections happen anymore. I'm old enough to think they used to happen every 5 years. Now they come along sort of every couple of years. Who knows? Could have an election in a month or two. Could be 2024. There's an old adage which I hear quite often when I go around talking to farmers, which is that while some people might not vote Labour, farmers often do quite well under Labour governments. And what I'd say to you is that's what I want to make happen. I want to help make an environmental change, but I don't want to do it in a complicated bureaucratic way, and I do want to make sure that the prime purpose is producing food, because I think that's what the country needs. Certainly we want to go to high quality. I hear the call for more local abattoirs. I don't think the market will deliver that. That's the kind of thing where I think you need intervention. I also think, and some of the other devolved nations are taking a different approach on this, I just think there was a reason why we had agricultural support, and that's because agriculture is a complicated industry subject to price fluctuations and weather, and actually that's historically why it's been needed. And if you want to guarantee food supply, you may have to do it. So I think you can tell I'm going to take a more interventionist approach. So, my pledge is quite simple. Labour's pledge: buy, sell, make more in Britain. Use public procurement much, much more effectively. The public spends a lot of money on food. Why don't we make sure it's British food? And why don't we push those standards up? And why shouldn't we be saying, actually, we don't want to be importing stuff from right across the globe if we can grow it here? It's going the wrong way now, going in the wrong direction. And finally, I'd just say, to some extent, for us, is a clue in the name, Labour. It's about work, it's about jobs, it's about work, respect, security. And I would say that's what my leader stands for. Now, there's a joke in there in terms of the comparison with the current Prime Minister, but you can make it for yourself. I think there's a big choice coming up. On whose side is the government? Is it on the side of a globalised system which basically says we'll take the cheapest from anywhere, or we're going to back producers here? We've made it very clear on our side, we're going to back British farmers. All I'm really asking you to do is take a look at what the choices are and think through what will be best for your industry. And that's my introduction, but the other thing I want to do is hear from you. So I'll listen closely to your questions and observations, and I'll have the opportunity to have a chat later this morning. Would really appreciate that. And thank you for giving me the chance to be involved in your industry, which I find absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that we're all fairly critical of ministers in not actually specifying food production as being a primary driver. The world now is in a pretty horrible place as far as food supply is concerned, and we should be looking after ourselves and supporting ourselves. But I'm sure that the audience will have some questions, and thank you very much for that address. Will, can I move on to you now from AHDB?
Can I have the flicker, please?
Oh, have you not got one? There we are.
Lovely.
Thank you.
It's better with the pictures. Right, morning everybody. Thank you for having us, and thank you to the MBA for having us today. So you've heard from John and Daniel there about the policy side of things and about how it's put together. What I'm going to talk to you about is slightly different now. It's kind of once the decisions have been made, what can be done about it, and what role AHDB can play in that, because there we go, that's me. Because we aren't policymakers, we collect a levy and then we try and make that levy work in the best possible way for the people who pay the levy, who are farmers. So just start off by saying we've just completed a big exercise at AHDB where we've got views in, and thank you to everybody who took part in that. We've got the results and we're starting to work on those now in terms of what we do deliver in future as AHDB. When we look specifically at the area around farm income, you can see from the chart that I've just put up at the moment is that when you look across the board in all sectors, the BPS payment at the moment makes up a huge amount of what is of the cost that comes in and the profitability in farms. And if given we're at Beef Expo at the moment, if you look at it from a grazing point of view, then the actual the numbers say that there's a lot of negative been made until you bring the BPS and the diversification into it. So the level of support that's received is absolutely vital to producers. And so you can see from this that it's going to cause a huge issue for people to be able to move into being a profitable business as we see the reduction in BPS. And there are ways that people can do that. And if you look at the next chart that I've got, just 1 second, I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So if we look at it from what farmers are planning to do about it at the moment, you can see that diversification is right at the top of the tree. But there are lots and lots of ways that people are looking at how they can tackle the issue of having less support in future, and whether that's looking at changing the shape of the business, growing the business, about how they can drive profitability on farm, and some people leaving and making a positive decision to actually do something different. So people are considering a lot of different things at the moment, and what we're trying to do at AHDB is we're trying to help people with that, and we're trying to help people with what the options are. So there are a myriad of things that we're looking at the moment. We do a lot of stuff on what we call market intelligence, and that's basically looking at what the evidence says and then what can we do with it and how can we put that into a format that's going to help people in that decision making. So we produce a lot of reports and things that people can read to kind of see how it will impact on them. So on our stand, which is stand 44, sorry. I knew I'd get told off fairly early in this. So stand 44, we've got what we call our horizon reports, and that's basically a summary about SFI and what it means. And so we've done a piece of work, and we've done it with Harper Adams, been looking at exactly what the impact will be and drawn some conclusions out of that. And so you can look and see how that might have an impact on your business. That's a summary version of it. There is a really, really long version on our website, and if you want to go and trawl through that, that's there. But there's also a huge amount of other stuff that we put on there in terms of calculators and what the impact, and you can put what your business is in there and then look at what the impact might be based on moving things around and how you can and what you might do. And there are other calculators on there about resilience and about key performance indicators on farm. So there's a huge amount of information on the website. We also do a lot with farmers in person as well. So we've got our KE teams out and about, our knowledge exchange teams, who are out there and they're talking to people on an ongoing basis. We have our Monitor Farm program, and again that looks at ways that that businesses can adapt and can change and put some really, really difficult questions out there. So having that network and the discussion groups helps us formulate a bit of a narrative around this as well, because it's all very well and good at looking at figures, but actually it's far more than just figures, and looking at how that pulls together, what the narrative is really important, and we've got a brilliant team out there who do that. And we all know that there are other challenges. So it's not just the reduction in support at the moment. It's the increased cost that we've got based on the global situation at the moment, whether that's through feed, fertiliser, fuel, and all the other input costs. So we're also trying to look at other ways that we can get technical information across. So whether that's the recommended lists and looking at varieties and how we can and how people are able to be able to drive the most from that, or even fertiliser. So we've put a fertiliser usage calculator up there that's been worked through quite recently to actually look at, we know that input costs have gone up, so what can be done about it and how can we help support people in their decision making. There is loads and loads of information on the website. So all the things that I've just discussed are available on the website. It's not just on the website though, because we know that doesn't suit everybody. So we've got hard copies of things, we've got podcasts, we've got webinars, we've got the full myriad of things. So if you want any of this and you drop by the stand earlier on, we'll be able to take your details and provide you with hard copies of things, or we'll be able to point you in the direction of any bits and pieces that you want. And we've got the YouTube channel, so there's a whole load of stuff. But this is really, really important under the banner of being able to, and Daniel's just talked about this as well, in terms of making sure that we can actually get the product to market. And so whether that's on our domestic market or whether that's in our in international markets. So making sure that we have that good reputational base is absolutely vital in doing that. And unless we have farms that are able to be profitable and be able to do the things that put us in the right reputational place, then we can go on and sell it. And then we can go on and do things like the Eat Balanced campaign that we ran on, that's been on TV over the first part of this year, which talks about the way we produce food over here. So the landscape, the standards and everything that goes along with it. It helps us build that picture. And it also then helps us be able to go abroad and to be able to talk when we are looking at those global opportunities, to be able to talk about it in the right way and to be able to show why the story that we have and everything in the right way. So we have to be able to have a thriving sector at home to be able to leverage that. And for us to be able to go and be able to sell that, and because we can't go and do those adverts without everybody doing what they do here. And it's not just about that, it's, these are some of the areas that we work in and some of the areas that the levy that you pay contributes to. We've got and I've done the wrong thing again. And so it's the kind of what do you get for the levy? So £4 and 5p of every beef animal that you sell comes into AHDB. That's topped up with a bit from the processor, and it covers all sorts of areas. Export development, we've got marketing to the UK consumer, reputational stuff, so that's looking at, you know, not just the selling things, but how do we impact on some of the messages that have been put out there and some of the false claims. We've got the working on the farms that I've talked about. We've got market and trade data, and it's really important to have the right data and evidence to be able to back all this up, and then support it with some of the technical things like genetics and the environment. So there's a whole myriad of things that are out there. So please come and have a chat with us. The team are going to be here all day, and there's lots of information on the website. Any specific questions, I'm more than happy to pick up. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you. Three different but very, very important and good speeches there. I'm going to open it up to the floor. Please don't be shy. Most people aren't in the farming community, but would someone like to start with the first question? Yes.
Hi Chris, Richard Finley, Don't Farmer, Not Far Away, and Livestock Board Chairman. A question for John. Some of the land I farm's been in stewardship for 30 years, and all of it for 20. So I've had experts tell me what they would like me to do on my farm in terms of biodiversity, nature enhancement, whatever, for, well, nearly 30 years on it all. So I'm wondering why, you know, when I've had this expert advice for so long, my farm is still classed as being in need of a recovery. And whilst I've been doing that all, I've done it at my own expense, because all these schemes have been based on income foregone. So you could argue that I've had to either reduce stocking rate or whatever, so to get this reward. So I see that as if that I've funded it myself, really. So my question for John would be, when will we see some public money for public goods that actually rewards me for this work I'm doing, rather than me have to do it out of my own pocket all the time, really, because of income foregone?
Richard, thank you so much for your question. Sorry, there was a little bit of noise. I might have missed the last bit, but I mean, your question is a good one, which is partly why we're changing the way that our environmental land management schemes will operate. I think it's recognised that some of the challenges now faced in the environment are significant, and although there have been schemes over the last 20-odd years, the UK, of course, was one of the first of the countries to introduce environmental management schemes under the CAP. The challenges are significant, and the schemes previously, they were under the EU methodology, as you say, were income forgone. So there was no incentive to drive farmers to improve the environment, although of course many farmers do as part of their farming practice, and as you said, Richard, yourself paid for that themselves. The new environmental land management schemes will reward farmers, will pay a financial incentive for them now to do that environmental work, to achieve the outcomes that are needed, everything from soil health to biodiversity to climate adaptation, and you know, there will be payment rates that go beyond the old income forgone, so there will be financial incentives. We've announced what those initial rates are, and we will continue to keep those under review, because we need to make sure, first of all, they're competitive, but actually they do encourage farmers to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking to bring about.
Just talk.
The technology always lets you down.
Just on the payment rates, we have a large area of common moorland, and the payment rate you're proposing would be about 5% of what we currently get under HLS. Clearly your definition of competitive is very different to mine.
Sorry, you're basically saying that what you would offer for is 5% of what we're currently getting.
Okay, I don't know the specific circumstances of your claim on what you're doing, but the intention is supposed to be that the payment rates under the new SFI will be the same, if not more. So I'd have to go back and look at your specific
It's not a special circumstance. It's literally the difference between the current HLS agreement we have and the payment rates associated with that, and the offering under the new SFI. It's simply the difference.
Okay.
You got that, did you?
No, I didn't.
No, so it's the difference between the HLS schemes,
yeah,
the current the proposed the new schemes going forward.
Okay. It might be better should we have a chat afterwards, because I think we probably need to just to understand your specific circumstances. But the intention is that the rates, the two schemes, the old and the new, should be comparable. Farmers should not be worse off if they're under the current stewardship schemes or HL. Okay. But I don't want to take, I appreciate your points, but I'm conscious I don't want to take up all the time we have for questions. So should we have a quick chat afterwards? Is that okay?
Jonathan Murray. I'm on a hill farm next to Richard. As far as Will's concerned, my technical performance is through the roof, but I'm still hemorrhaging money. My hill sheep have gone out with 1.75 lambs this time. So that's where I am. I cannot improve on that. My beef cows have got more than one calf each, thanks to nature and twins. So technically, I'm up there. But we've got a situation where no one's standing up and damning this situation. I see it as somebody said a train crash waiting to happen, but I'll take a vehicle analogy. Think of a juggernaut heading off in a sat-nav, following a sat-nav, and it's hitting an increasingly narrow and bumpy road, which seems to be the case with Elms at present. And the driver's continuing to follow the sat-nav. The navigator is saying, look at the road signs, don't keep going, i.e. the lesser people in DEFRA who are getting the feedback on the ground. And in the back, the farmers are saying, we don't want to go down this road. While the green objectives are laudable, they're not helping in our situation at all. And the NFU, unfortunately, instead of putting a roadblock in front of this juggernaut, are following behind, and they're waving climate change flags and renewables, unfortunately, instead of getting into what they really should be doing and turning this whole process around for the sake of food production. Thank you.
Daniel, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I could come in on this. I was struggling to hear some of that. I'm sorry, the sound isn't great from up here, but I think I got the general drift. And I think I would say it goes back to my opening observation, that the complexity of some of these schemes and actually the low rate could well have almost the opposite outcomes to the things that I think the government was seeking to do. I genuinely wonder, in a lot of cases, whether people will take up schemes, but more importantly, with the low rates, it just doesn't make economic sense as far as I can see. And I mean, there's two ways you can look at this. You can, as an opposition politician, I can say, well, maybe that was the plan all along. And I'm afraid, I think some of us do rather think that was the plan all along. Again, I don't blame the civil servants who are tasked with trying to make this thing work, but you do tend to come to that conclusion. So there's going to have to be some changes here, or we're going to find, I think, and you talk about the juggernaut, I'm afraid, I think we can see some really serious economic consequences and social consequences coming down the line. And, sorry to be political, but I'm a politician, and I'm afraid my party thinks that there's a danger that what happened to manufacturing 20 or 30 years ago is what's in store for the agricultural sector. And I do think when you look at the trade deals, again, you come to some fairly obvious conclusions that there is, I said at the beginning, there isn't a plan. Well, maybe there may be a very grand plan, actually. And it doesn't necessarily include a future for British agriculture as food producers. Well, we just think that's the wrong way to go.
Great. I think there's a saying in life, isn't there, that when you're wrong, you should be man enough to stand up and say that you're wrong. But we're not seeing it. We're not seeing any changes. But we all have to live with it, don't we? And that's where it's so painful. But
sorry, just to add one quick sentence. Yes, the government is committed to the path, which is a combination of environmental land management schemes, productivity, innovation, grant schemes to support food production, and the animal health and welfare pathway to improve animal health and welfare on farm. But the government has been quite clear that actually this is an evolution. So as we roll out the schemes, we will look at take-up, we will look and see what problems, areas there may be in certain schemes, and we will look to address those together with the farmers that are participating. So what may be in place today may not be in place in a few years' time, because we want to learn, we want to adapt, and we want to ensure that we are able to deliver the objectives of the scheme, which is to continue to ensure we have a sustainable, productive, efficient agricultural industry in this country.
Great, thank you. There's a question up at the top, and then I'll come to you, Neil, after this one.
Yeah, hi there, Tim Sedgwick from H&H. John, we've had a few conversations at some of our events at H&H about this, and we've got a farmer not too far away from here in the SFI pilot, and when we work out the payment rates and we work out the £5,000 he's getting, he's still worse off, and he would be far better financially by quite a large margin staying out of the SFI, which is supposedly called an incentive. So that's more of a statement, John, for you. Daniel, it's easy to be in opposition when the other side don't really know what they're doing, and I don't think they do, and it's fairly clear. And I was greatly encouraged by everything you had to say there. But my question to you would really is simple. What would you be doing differently?
Shall I quickly answer the first point? The great thank you for your question. The first thing is, of course, you're on the pilot, so you are feeding directly back to DEFRA. So please feed in those comments about payment rates and the like, because that's what we want to hear from those in the pilots, and that will enable us to adapt to the scheme as it goes forward. But thank you for being part of the pilot, because we need farmers to be involved and to tell us what's right and what's wrong, what's working, what's not working.
Just need you to take notice, really.
No, look, very fair question, and I tried to outline some of the principles. What I would say is I've got one young researcher, and DEFRA has, I don't know how many hundreds of people designing these schemes. So in answer to your question, it partly depends where we're at and what we inherit. But I think you can tell from what we're saying is that we're much more interventionist, that we put food production, without going over the history of all this, as some of you will remember, the first iteration of the Agriculture Bill forgot to mention food. And I was thinking, listening to the previous comments, if I asked you how you described yourselves, my guess is you describe yourself as farmers. Yeah, and environmental land managers is part of it, but farmers, food producers. So when, and I do think it's when we get the opportunity, and I come in and I'm asked, Minister, what do you want? These are the things we'll be saying we want. Then the question is, for these guys who've got the technical expertise, is to deliver it. Now, this is going to be a classic British thing, I suspect, where we've started down a line, and we will have to amend those programs. We'll have to look at those rates to make sure that that money actually gets to farmers. Because one thing that hasn't really been discussed so far this morning is the apportioning of that money between tier 1, 2 and 3. Now, you know, there's some grand visions, but actually if you look across government, environmental land management is now paying for apparently going to pay for a remarkable range of things around nature recovery and so on. Yet this was the money that's supposed to be promised for farming. It doesn't add up. So the answer to your question is there will be a reset, but I can't tell you the detail until we get there, I'm afraid, but I can outline the principles. And that's make, buy and sell more in Britain.
It's a very big challenge. We have a big estate not very far from where I live, very, very good stock land, and everything has been taken out of stock production. He's planting trees, he's putting beavers on, he's trying to put a stalk on. There will be no food coming off that big estate. He's even pushed one of his brothers off one of the farms in order to do it. So, you know, the question has to be, does the government want food or does it not? It's actually now not a question about what price is food. It's a question about, do you want us to produce it? And a lot of farmers are getting very frightened that the answer is no.
But we have a clear answer to that, and it's yes.
Yeah, okay. Neil.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Neil Wilson, Institute of Auctioneers and Appraisers in Scotland. First thing I'd like to do is just say to the gentleman down here, totally sympathise with what you're saying, but there are organisations who are trying to push back against this. The Institute of Auctioneers are one. I know the LAA are another. I know the NBA are trying to do the same. So we are doing everything we can to look after members' and farmers' interests. Now, one of the other things I do is I do quality assurance reviews on farm resilience reports that are produced under DEFRA scheme. And there is a growing evidence base there that these schemes, John, unfortunately, are going to see farmers leave the industry. We are going to see significant amount of livestock put off because the farm advisors are doing the right thing. They are giving the advice to the farmer under that resilience review scheme. And unfortunately, I think I've reviewed probably about 30 to 35 cases at the moment, the majority coming from the livestock sector. And in every single one of those cases, the advice has been, your reduction in single farm payment will be nowhere near recovered by your sustainable farming incentive or your ELM schemes or any other capital grant schemes. So I'm sorry, the advice has to be, push your livestock off. If you look at the slide that we'll put up in terms of the profitability of farm businesses around about grazing livestock, it's a challenge. That is a real worrying situation for many, many farmers, particularly in livestock areas, John. And I think Daniel made the point. The big point I would make is it's a socio-economic issue that we're facing into here. You must have the evidence because you guys are asking for the reports. I just would like to know how you're taking that evidence on board. And if there is going to be any change, you talked about the pathway you're going on there with government. Is there any feedback going into ministers? And is there any likelihood of a change in pathway there? Or are we stuck? And all of this is a waste of time in terms of reports and things like that for farmers.
Neil, thank you for your question. There's lots of unpacking there. We haven't got a lot of time. But just to restate a few principles. The first thing is that the schemes that we're implementing, we are still developing. We're testing and trialling. We're piloting. We're using and working with farmers on the ground to feed back information. I can absolutely assure you it goes back to ministers, and ministers follow very closely the development and elaboration of these schemes. There will be changes in agriculture for sure. We've called it the agricultural transition. Obviously, to reiterate, the government is committed to agriculture, but a different type of agriculture that combines support for enhancing and improving the environment alongside improving and enhancing productivity and sustainability agriculture sector. But yes, that will mean changes will happen. But we do want to learn lessons. We do want to continue to adapt and reform and revise all of the schemes to make sure that they are relevant, appropriate to farm businesses on the ground, and they do achieve the outcomes that we want. And things like food security is part of that. I mean, I don't want to take too much time, but we are 63% self-sufficient of what we need. We do produce 74% of the food that we produce because we do, of course, export. As been mentioned, the government is committed every 3 years to report to Parliament. Daniel explained the report on food security. We are self-sufficient in a number of products, in poultry, in lamb, in dairy, and eggs. So it's not something we take lightly. We want to make sure that food security is constantly reviewed, and particularly at the moment with the situation in Ukraine, where we don't rely actually on imports from Eastern Europe, from Ukraine and Russia, but of course we're impacted by world prices. So we are monitoring the market. I chair the UK Agricultural Market Monitoring Group with all the devolved administrations. We're looking really carefully at what the situation in the market is. And again, we advise ministers on what action should be taken. So all these things are being looked at. We're continually wanting to revise and adapt as necessary the schemes and to learn from farmers on the ground. But change is happening. We've left the EU, we've left the old CAP, and we are into a new world. And it's not, as I said again, an evolution, a revolution, but an evolution. So please continue to work with us, feedback, be part of the pilots, be part of the engagement process, and tell us. We need to. Ministers will say they want to know and they want to hear. Thank you.
John's doing a heroic job at trying to explain the government's position, and I admire him for doing so. I think that the basic problem is, look, first of all, the government didn't actually want to assess food security every 3 years. They were forced into it by the House of Lords. They originally wanted to do it every 5 years. I think we were quite prescient in saying you need to do it a lot more often than that, frankly. We need many more updates. But the basic problem is there is no vision for the future. There is no outlined vision for what British agriculture looks like in 20, 25 years' time. And that's what we want to work on, because at the moment it's a transition to what? I'll leave you with that question.
Good. We'll take one more question because I'm aware of the fact that we've run out of time, and it looks as though I might have to do two. We'll do one here and then we'll go straight in front. Just, if possible, quite a quick one.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Abby Reader, I'm a farmer from Wales, and this question is for John and Daniel, really. John, I was a little bit alarmed to see a line on your post that said recipients won't have to farm the land to receive the payments. And I just wondered if you could expand on what the parameters will be to ensure that these payments in England are ring-fenced for farming and rural communities and not taken by larger organisations. And as a very quick example, as a farmer in Wales who applied a couple of years ago for a wildlife and nature recovery fund, I got beaten by the Wildlife Trust and Keep Wales Tidy and told that my project was far too small to benefit society from this fund. So what are you going to do to make sure this payment is ring-fenced to benefit farming communities? And just really quickly for Will, to try and bring you in as well, I was a little bit horrified by your graph which showed the number of farmers who want to diversify, leave or shrink their businesses. I wonder what story that tells and whether you want to comment on it.
Great, thank you. I don't know who wants to start on that.
I'll answer your first question really quickly. Obviously, the post-EU exit, we have devolution, so Wales has its own agricultural policy as to Northern Ireland, Scotland. So everything I said is about England, grant schemes that are operated by the Welsh Government. I'm afraid you will have to take it with them. In terms of the ring fencing of money, the Government has committed, as I said, to maintain the same overall budget in cash total for the period of this Parliament. But it is now spending it in a new way in relation to the schemes it will implement. So there will be a broader set of applicants for things like the Environmental Land Management Scheme because it's focused at farmers and land managers. But it's about now achieving the new outcomes and objectives of the new schemes and the new approach.
I'd just repeat what I said earlier. I think you've identified a very real problem. I mean, the same amount is quite clearly not going to be going to farmers. You're going to be competing with others, and I think the money is being spent many times over in different parts of government programs, and of course that can't work. So this is all to be resolved in the future, but it's well worth arguing over it because it's not finished.
Will, I'm going to ask you to reply to it as soon as you patiently sat there all morning.
It's normally the other way around. I'll do more panels with John and Daniel because it makes easy work of it. No, Abby, I think what it shows that people are starting to really think about what the future holds and that things are going to be very different in future. So I think it demonstrates and that's what the kind of the report I was talking about earlier on shows is that people are realising that things are going to be very different and actually some serious decisions on the future of their businesses need to be made. So, and I think it's a really important point at the moment is that people do need to start thinking about that. And although there are people, and it's demonstrated by the slide I put up, who are thinking about how they can adapt to future, there's still a number of people out there who probably haven't realised what the huge impact what's coming down the road is going to have on them. So I'm heartened in a way that people are starting to think about it, but you're right, it doesn't tell the brightest story in terms of the continuation of the number of people we've got in the industry.
John, last question, really quick, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief. I'm John Draycup, Chairman of Red Tractor Beef and Lamb, but also a Dartmoor Hill farmer, for which we are very, very fortunate to have such a range of speakers here today. And you have certainly thrown a huge amount of information at us. And clearly, for the industry and for the country, change is what's happening, and it's happening at a pace across all sectors, and agriculture is not excluded from that. However, culturally, as farmers, we have been encouraged now for generations to produce food. There have been environmental schemes now for 30, 40 years, of which a lot of us have participated in. But what we are looking for is greater and more effective communication as to what those changes and what the changes are going to mean and where we're looking to go. We have high quality, high value products that we can brand and we can effectively demonstrate to our consumers through assurances and various other marketing schemes to promote that we have the best quality, the best consistency, the best traceability in what our products deliver to our consumers. But we also need some very, very clear messaging about what is required of us as producers and organisations. And leading on to my question, what I would like to ask each panel member is, based on the facts that you know, if you were a beef farmer, what would you be doing today? Thank you.
Shall I start off?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, well.
Okay. I mean, to answer your question from my point of view, John, what I'd be doing is I would be making sure that I was aware of everything that was everything that was available, but I'd also be looking very, very hard at my business and thinking about what the most sustainable way of operating the future is. So I think everybody out there has to be as aware as they can of what's on offer, of what changes are coming, and then have a really long, hard look at their own business to make sure that it is, because there are going to be lots and lots of different ways that people can tackle this, and there's no one answer, there's not a linear route through it, so everybody's got to look at it through their own lens, and it will mean something different for everybody, but don't ignore it, is what I would be saying at the moment. Make sure that you're engaging and really forensically looking at what it means for the future of your business.
I'm going to agree with Will. I think that's the perfect answer. I think no farmer at the moment can afford just to carry on as they were. I think there is a change. We've mentioned that. The agricultural transition is now happening. There are things available to farmers to give them alternative income streams to BPS. It's not intended as a direct replacement. These are alternative income streams. There are other things that farmers could do as well. And I think, as should be the case constantly with the farm business, to look at your business, the situation, what is available, and to reappraise and evaluate on an ongoing basis. That's what's best for the business. But the key thing from the DEFRA perspective is, look at the schemes we're offering, and if you can participate in the pilots and give us feedback to make sure we do ensure that the schemes we are putting a lot of money into do benefit you and do enable you to continue to farm and produce food and manage the environment.
I think the honest answer is I'd be worrying. I'd be worried because I think what we're seeing coming down the line is not great. But the positive thing is don't turn inwards. Do actually, as these guys are saying, explain what the problem is, because things can change. Or, I mean, I don't know how many government policies I've seen over the years where everyone says, this is what's going to happen. And then, funnily enough, something else happens. So it's not guaranteed it's going to go this way. It's going to have to change, because I think if it doesn't, I'm afraid for too many people, it's going to be the exit scheme rather than the future. And I think that's the wrong way to be going.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the National Beef Association, can I thank our three speakers sincerely for their speeches. I'm sure that one or two of you will be grabbing our speakers afterwards to try and get a bit more clarity and have a further discussion. I guess that's what you should do. Try and have a chat. Go to the AHDB stand. DEFRA stand is here as well if you want to go and talk to them about the various schemes that are coming on. And, go and give your opinion. I've been doing some webinars with our auctioneers, and I've been saying to them, don't sit there. You've got to speak. You've got to tell people where your concerns are. If you're talking to farmers and you're not aware completely of what the schemes can or can't deliver, ask the question. Get the information so that you can answer those questions. It's going to be a rocky road. I don't doubt that. I'm long enough in the tooth now that I've seen subsidy payments being given to farmers to rip hedges out. We're now being paid to put them back in. And things will change. The sad thing is that, in Cumbria, where I live, and a lot of my customers are in from the auctioneering days, there was 50-something thousand breeding ewes taken off one fell that runs from Penrith right along to Walkup Ranges, post foot and mouth. And the land there where there's very few ewes on has become wilderness. And to actually believe that we can turn land from wilderness into good agricultural land overnight again, if policy changes, is a myth. It will take generations to get back to where we are today. And we shouldn't allow our lands to be changed so that we can't produce food. It's a primary thing for farmers to do. And we are very good environmentalists. We look after the land, we look after the birds, we look after the diversification, because that's what we do as farmers. And we should fight our corner. The one comforting thing is that, and I don't think any of us have talked about it, but I actually think that we're looking for the certainly medium, if not long term, at good livestock prices. The question is whether they can make farming sustainable when you haven't got the income that you've been accustomed to. And that's the big bridge. And personally, I listened to a world radio program coming over this morning, and they were talking about New Zealand, where the young in New Zealand, food prices are chasing them out the country, and a lot of them are going to Australia, where food and incomes from salaries are greater. You know, the world is getting more expensive in food, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about that because our product is so good. We should be proud of what we produce, and we should sell it as quality product, and people should pay a fair price for it. If government aren't going to support us to make food cheap, then the public should have to pay for what we produce. But thank you one and all. Please speak to our speakers afterwards if you can catch them, and enjoy the day. And the next seminar, I think, is probably starting in about 17 minutes. I've overrun, but thank you for your interaction, and have a good day. Thank you.